friends, welcome to our midweek moment. Pastor Nicole here. So glad you clicked on. Well, this weekend we wrapped up our sermon series, Beautiful Resistance, the Life of Daniel. And we finished it out with a story that is one that we learned in Sunday school when we were little children, Daniel and the Lion's Den. And we talked a little bit about what it means for Daniel to stand up for God against the king's decree, and how maybe we could think about that in our own lives now. If you haven't had a chance to see that sermon, I invite you to go and watch that online. But I wanted to talk to you about the rest of Daniel. So if you were to flip open your Bible, you will see that we talked about the first 6 chapters of Daniel, the first half of the book. And there's great narrative stories in there, right? We talked about Daniel refusing to eat the king's food. We talked about him interpreting King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. We talked about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the fiery furnace. And of course, Daniel and the lion's den. These great stories that have this similar theme kind of woven throughout of beautiful resistance is what I'm calling it. Just that idea that we can honor God, we can do the right thing, and that God will be with us as we stand up against those things in our lives that aren't right. So we talked a little bit about that. That's the first half of the book of Daniel, kind of those narrative stories. They're really great stories. The second half of Daniel, verses chapters 7 through 12, are really different. They're not narrative stories so much. It's often called the Little Apocalypse, the second half of Daniel. And it is Daniel relaying these visions, these dreams that he has had. Now, we know from reading the first half of the book that God gave Daniel the gift of being able to interpret dreams. And so the second half of this book is these dreams that he has been given. And it's very different from the first half. It's almost like they're 2 books kind of smashed together. And it's very interesting when you read through it, because you might wonder, like, what is going on? There's talk of like animals appearing, he sees a bear, he sees all of these different animals that appear. He talks about a man coming and talking to him, and you're like, who is this man? What is going on? So it's kind of cryptic if we read it with our, modern lens. But let me tell you kind of what's going on here. Now, we have to remember the context of the book of Daniel. And the context is that it was written by people who were in captivity in Babylon. They had been forced to leave their home country in Judea, in Israel, to come and live in Babylon. And they were there for a long time, many decades. And so there's this kind of feeling of like, are we ever going to get to go back home? Are we going to be stuck here forever? Are we ever going to get to worship in the temple again? Are we ever going to get to see our homeland again? I mean, you can kind of imagine how awful it must have been to be this stranger in a strange land and to have to kind of learn all new customs and take part in a whole new culture. And it would be really hard. And by this point, people are starting to like really lose faith that God is going to save them from this. And so the second half of Daniel is kind of talking about all of these things that God is going to do, that God is going to right all of these wrongs, and God is still working even if we can't see it, and God is still present in our lives even if we can't feel it. And so it was really written, these dreams, these visions were recorded down as a way to remind the Israelites that they had hope, that God was still with them, that God was still working, that they weren't abandoned, they weren't forgotten, and that God would make it right someday. Now, not everybody got to see that day. People died in captivity all the time, but there's still that hope. And so the second half of Daniel is really written to remind us of the hope we have, that God is still there. So I'd invite you to read through chapters 7 through 12 of Daniel. It's very interesting. I wish we had had time to get into it in the sermons, but alas, we did not. And I think it can serve as a reminder to us still today that when life feels hopeless, when it seems like God isn't around, that God isn't acting, that we're just like spinning on this crazy world, spinning on this globe, like, what is happening? All these terrible things are happening all the time. It feels so bleak out there. It feels so terrible. Why hasn't God stepped in? Why hasn't God fixed things? Where is God now? And I think these chapters in Daniel just remind us that God is there, that God will right the wrongs, and in the end, God wins. It may not look like it now, and we may not see that this side of heaven. We may not see our world be fixed and pieced back together and made whole again, but God will do it. And we just have to trust that God will do it in God's timing. It's hard for us, with our little finite minds that and our lack of being able to just kind of see the whole picture. We just want it fixed now. But that's not how God always works, right? God works in God's timing, not in our timing. But God does give us that reminder of hope. And so we cling to that hope that things will be better one day, that God will triumph over all the evil in this world, and that it will all be set right again. So if you take a read through those chapters in Daniel, let me know. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. And yeah, it's a really interesting part of Daniel because it's just so different from the first half. But take a read. It doesn't take long to read. Just glance through it. Let me know your thoughts. And I hope you will join us this weekend. We are going to have a guest preacher from Chaddock, which is one of our United Methodist agencies in our conference that does incredible work with children. So you're not going to want to miss that. You can join us in person or online for that. And then the week after, we're going to be starting a new sermon series on the book of Psalms. And really excited for us to dive into that. So we will see you all soon. I hope to see you in person or online this weekend. Have a great rest of your week. Take care. Bye.